Hi, so this is sort of a Christmas, solstice, New Year's video, and we're going to go over um, how the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is the origin or the creation of the world, um, and how people have found this, or they've described it in many different ways. They've seen it without really knowing what's going on, right? Like it's the deepest truth of every religion that I'm aware of, but it's the best and the most accurate and the most obvious description of the ultimate truth that you could have. It's sort of like the way that God tells people the ultimate truth, right? So people, when they go out into the world and learn and explore and discover, they find out things about reality. They find out things about the world, and then you go and you tell other people that, or you tell yourself that, what you found. You make like a narrative of it. And the life and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is basically God going out into himself, learning and then telling, like, here's what I've learned. So the same way that I'm telling you what I've learned in this video, Jesus Christ is God telling you what he's learned, basically. And so that's the center of Christmas. That's why the whole world sort of revolves around the birth or the creation of this understanding. And so, but first, I thought I would I don't know, do like a demo warm up, or I don't know. I think you could call this metanoia, like a remembering, like a mindfulness, right? Of to say the truth of God, or to say the truth of anything, you need to be connected to reality, right? So a lot of the stuff that I do is like, how do you develop a connection to reality? And so I like to use water. But if I'm not in water, like trampolines or like springy stuff. But I mean, really, I can't think of anything more awesome than a trampoline. Lets you sort of feel that everythingness. So instead of just being like a body in space, right? It's that you can tack into and feel, oh, like there's as much going on in every direction, right? And so what the trampoline does is it kind of softens up the ground direction and brings it closer to the density of the space around you. So normally it's like you feel a lot more under you if you're just walking, and because you feel so intensity like below, you kind of like, it's more difficult to feel the intensity and the density of like around or in, right? So the trampoline softens the down, and also connects the spatial movements. Potentially, you can more easily develop an awareness in all directions, rather than one that's like focused on any particular thing, for lack of a better word. And it does that just by making the fruits of your effort a little bit more productive. And that's what happens with fins. Like fins makes the fruit of your kicking a little bit more productive, and so it tends to enhance, or it'll amplify your interest in swimming. That's what's cool about gear. Or like a surfboard. A surfboard can amplify your interest in wave mechanics. And so a trampoline amplifies stuff in that same way, just because it makes you so much better at it, that it draws the mind. Like, it draws the mind more closely into reality, increases the interest. but ideally you would have the same interest, like as you're thinking about or contemplating reality, you would want to have the same interest in it as you do if you're, you know, surfing like a big wave or doing some crazy backflip or on stage or performance or successful or anything. So all those different techniques, all those different tools and implements are cool for letting you feel the type of interest that you should have when you contemplate like truth. Because thinking about or conceptualizing truth requires an exertion. It's like anybody can do it, just like anybody can get some sort of discipline or a workout program, but it requires a desire to do it, and it requires training, right? And so this is the beginning of the reflection on Christmas, is that it's creating the whole world. So it's like the highest thing, and it's this pattern, this principle is creating the whole world, even as you go down to just like your felt immediate experience is created by essentially Christmas, because that's the source of the world, and the source of each moment is this source. So you'll find that in physical exercise, you only get better with skillful or intelligent kind of suffering, right? So the only way that you can correctly engage with the world, even at a physical level, is this skillful suffering. It's the only means by which you can create like a perfect or exalted body. Like if that's your goal, like if you were into bodybuilding, there's this feeling state, there's this pattern of being that is essentially, it's craving some sort of suffering of self-denial. Like feel the burn. What's the burn? Oh, that's like, I don't want to continue to do this rep, but I want this other thing to grow so much. Like I want my body to grow so much that I push through the pain of what it is now. I let go of the pain of what it is now, and then from that, like, oh, I erupt like bigger biceps over time. Or any sort of skill or attribute, like any sort of training method that works, is this whole no pain, no gain sort of thing, and that's essentially true, right? So even with things like fasting, dieting, charity, like these things that bring us, when people say, oh, they bring us closer to God, what does that mean? They bring us closer to an understanding and an experience of God. So why is it that like fasting or prayer, meditation, extreme sports, like that's yoga, right? Another word for yoga is an extreme activity that brings you closer to God. Some sort of physical activity that brings you closer to God is yoga. So a lot of people found that like, oh, if I stretch or I open my chakras, like I feel this exhilarating rush that I attribute with God. And the same people feel the same way when they're doing like downhill mountain biking or skateboarding or surfing. And even in that, like in surfing, there's like the suffer, even in an activity like surfing where you're, you know, very dialed in and you, the reality is moving you, there's still this willingness to experience crashing. Like, you know, you're going to crash, you know, it's going to eat you up, you know, you're going to go into this, if you really get into surfing, like, you know, you're going to go into the suffering of having your breath restricted against your will. You're gonna be going full bore and feeling really great and breathing super hard, and then boom, I want to keep breathing, but I can't, and I just have to accept this. And so even with a passive activity like surfing, the only way to get better is this passive acceptance of suffering, and that passive acceptance of suffering is what creates the skill. Like, and so you have to surf those waves where if you mess up, you're gonna be held under, and you're gonna mess up. You're going to have a learning curve. So there's no way to experience. There's no way to experience the phenomenon that will make you better in surfing. The bigger, the better wave. There's no way to experience that without voluntarily accepting the suffering of that, like of falling off of that. Basically, once you get it, like once you catch a wave, or when you're trying to catch a wave and you miss it, right? Like if you're trying for theosis or trying for an understanding of God, if you go for it and miss it, it can have bad consequences for you. It can screw up your life. It can cause psychosis. It can cause injury. It can cause confusion. It can cause all sorts of things. And that's the exact same way as a surfer learning how to surf. So you actually have to be in that area of that suffering. Or if you're going to get better at a physical sport, you have to be willing to submit yourself to the coach or to the training program that forces you to go into suffering, and you have to kind of voluntarily accept that. And that's what makes things better. That's an example of Christmas. It's this eternal truth. And so that's a lower example. There's all sorts of examples that are like that, like fasting. You don't want to fast so much that you like die, or that you screw up your life, or that you become like whatever. You don't want to do an activity so much that is bad. You don't just go to an extreme, but it has to be at a certain like intensity. It has to be actually extreme. It has to be a super extreme, skillful suffering, and it's crazy. If it was self-willed, only the greatest people in the world would ever be able to do it. But it's not self-willed any more than surfing is self-willed. And so that the things like fasting, the things like meditation, once they're caught, it'll push you to do what looks like extreme things. But it's just a relaxing at the right place and the right time. Like understanding reality, understanding the pain of it, and actually going into it, and with the knowledge that it is suffering. Like the Buddhists say, the world is suffering, and at its core, to go from like the base. This goes down. It goes under these examples of the human level. Right, of like, oh, I'm doing my no pain, no gain bicep stuff, like fasting, dieting, study, right? How is it that you get better? Like you're reading, you experience the suffering of confusion. Like if you're not learning under people that like make your brain hurt, to this of constant this feeling of like, oh my God, I'm so stupid, I can't believe it. If you're not willing to put yourself in that situation, there's no mental growth, there's no mental learning, and people have a hard time telling that, because it's like if you're mentally pushing somebody, you cause suffering. The same way, if they don't get it, it causes suffering. When you're teaching somebody and you can speak truths to people, or if you submit yourself to somebody else speaking truth to you, concepts and ideas and information will like hit your way in your brain, and you can actually surf them or ride them to like great intellectual heights. But at the same time, putting yourself in a position of that type of vulnerability where you're letting your mind be so strongly influenced by somebody, if the things coming out of them, which it's not even necessarily them, it's like that's why you start listening to people, you start listening for real or whatever. As that hits, if it hits wrong or you do it wrong, you can get like thrashed in the psychic or the mental waters. And so you'll and again, it's a willingness to that sort of suffering. You have to have that the same way that you have to have a suffering in fasting. You have to have a suffering with your breath work, right? All sorts of exercise where it's going on is essentially just figuring out how to do breath work to the point of this beneficial suffering. And it's like, well, why? What's the point of all this suffering? Why is the world suffering and all that? It's the same reason that when people get into surfing, they're going to be held down. And if they push themselves to these really great heights, they could die. That pattern that you see so easily visible in surf culture is the pattern of every single activity, every single sport, every single possible thing you could possibly imagine has that underlying pattern behind it that is the visible pattern in surfing. So it's like that's the source of the suffering. And to go all the way up to the very, very highest level, you have this creation, like all things are the body of God. But so how is there any thingness? How is there creation? How is it not just all God? And God has to die. For me to exist, it means that God has withdrawn from that area of reality. But not normally if God withdraws, there would just be non-existence. If reality itself withdraws from its beingness, there's nothing there. So how is it that I am not God, but I'm somehow, God has to be there, and also totally hands off? Like, no, it's actually you there. And the only way for that to happen is if God entirely dies and you have the body becomes inanimate matter. But the body remains. So there's this complete submission into or allowing of death, and that death is what creates every person, every particular thing, everything that is not God, everything that is creation is created in this horrific suffering as the wholeness or the totality of God is just ripped apart and nailed down to and stuck and fixed. And it's that type of suffering. And when people suffer, like when we suffer, especially voluntarily, suffering is suffering is suffering. And so that suffering is a step closer to all suffering, which is the creation of the world. That it's that thing that we call suffering, of this vacating of control, a letting go of the wants or the desires of the body, so that what is can have more. We're giving up control of our body to this greater and greater level, and people find that rewarding. They find it meaningful. They find it to be the source of their talent, the source of their understanding, the source of whatever. And so it's like suffering is, reality is suffering. It's emerging from suffering. It's emerging from kenosis, the death and the dying of God. And it's done willingly through love of, I want this to exist, so I suffer for it. I give all. And so that's why there's a lot of Christmas and stuff at Christmas, is that it's supposed to be like a giving of it all. And then when you give all, like I was having a conversation with a friend about like charity is another form of charity. Is like fasting, right? All these things are a way of like giving up wealth, giving up our abundance. Like even if it's our abundance of breath, it's like an abundance of oxygen. It's giving up that abundance. So in some sense, you could be literally giving up abundance, and it's like giving money away. And we notice like all the monks or enlightened people have these vows of poverty. They give everything away, and that's this extreme form of kenosis. And I was like seeing it like, oh, when you're doing charity, it's just like fasting. The skill for the middle way is to not do it to such extreme that you make yourself financially unhealthy. Like let's say that you have a ton of finances. You don't want to make yourself financially unhealthy, but you do want to be giving away to a degree that makes you uncomfortable, to a degree that's like, oh wow, I have to really push through this. Like I have to really give away, and you give it in such a way that your overall financial health is not affected. Like you don't want to like, especially if you have responsibilities in the world, if you're attached to your family, which is attached to your community, which is attached, like you have all these attachments and responsibilities. You don't want to make yourself unhealthy with your asceticism or with the suffering, or like with the, along with the quest or the awakening that inspires you to become closer to God. If you go into that with so much enthusiasm that it causes suffering around you. Instead of you suffering, everyone around you starts to suffer. That's unskillful means. And that's just not catching the wave. Like if you're doing it correctly, it's like when you're in the water, you're going to be immersed in suffering. Either you're suffering or everybody around you is suffering. And then that suffering, once accepted, it's not that bad. It's like how the ocean is bad. It's like how ice baths are bad. Like that's why people get so much benefit from ice baths, because it trains you in the exact same way as exposure to truth or exposure to the reality that you need to be able to go into in order to let it move you and express truth. Like a surfer catching a wave, you have to be able to tolerate that shift in temperature, that shift in density, that shift in being. And for a lot of us, especially in modern culture, it's like getting into an ice bath. It's so different from our default state that getting into it is like a massive shock. So doing things like ice baths and other like passively extreme activities, just suffering, right? Skillful suffering, primes and preps the mind, and it makes it so that you're able to, potentially enter into and understand truth. And so that's that's like the Christmas spirit. And so there's so like once you see that truth, you can apply it to any activity: breath control, surfing, intellectual stuff, business, finances, charity, politics, anything. You'll find that what causes the fruits in those activities is the identical pattern that is shown to us in Christ. And everybody kind of knows this at an instinctive level, at least through one lens or another. Everyone knows that this is the secret or the truth of reality. This is how they got everything good in their life. And to really enter into this is like, it's a somber place. And so that's why things like, it's a somber, majestic place. And so that's why people have like temples and churches, is because it doesn't, to really go deeply into the Christmas spirit, while it is creating this trampoline, the trampoline's a little bit silly, right? Like any technique, any activity other than, basically an Orthodox church, like the real ones. Like a real church is like a place that makes it feel appropriate to deeply enter into the truth. And so it's not like, it's like there's some truths that you get from partying, or some truths that you get from a rave, or on exercising, or cool activities or performances or all that. There's like, you can see that pattern, but they're all lower versions of that pattern. And so like temples are places where it feels appropriate and easy to enter into understanding, like in some place, like it almost makes it entering into the truth is almost always feels shameful. Like, oh, why did I give that? Why did I ever live not responding to the truth, sort of thing? And that's just the pattern that like everybody has with it. It's not like, oh, there's good people, there's bad people. It's like this experience is required of anybody. And yeah, so Merry Christmas, like the world is suffering, life is suffering. It is literally suffering, the same way that everyone thinks that this is all based off of like atoms or electrons. It's all actually like suffering. All of it's the death of God. All of it's and genuinely like the most empathic, transcendent, possible, ultra high level, possible conceptualizable thing of God, whatever the best and most highest thing is that you can ever, whatever is worshipful, whatever actually pulls at your heartstrings, whatever is actually real, is the thing like sacrifice to give creation to anything. Everything is the body of it. Everything is consuming, eating, wearing the body of God, almost like a skin suit. We would be normally formless, shapeless being, but like we can put on the body of God, and we're created or brought into the existence just as God is. And so that's like people, horrible. Yeah, so misunderstandings of this is still like where you get all this like horrible evil and sadism and all of this other stuff. It's the necessary consequence of a reality capable of moving you, of a reality capable of creating you. It's the same way that like you can't surf without the wipeouts. You can't learn without the confusion. It's not a yin-yang thing. It's just like come up with a scenario where you're learning how to surf that is not that doesn't require you to breathe or to have a little less than you would want. It doesn't require you to suffer. Like try and find it doesn't make any sense. There's no meaning to it. And so because like if you want meaning, then that creates a situation to where you can wipe out. The waves compound on, you can get held under. It creates this multiple tier reality to where you have to breathe one thing and you can go into this other, but you can't breathe. You can go into these thicker, denser places because you as a self or as an identity is less real than real. So when you go into it, you can't breathe. Or you get cut off from eternity as well. Like the eternity of expansiveness is like as you go into it, it's yeah, it's hard to I don't know, it's not hard to conceptualize because it's just this is the pattern of reality. It's everything that you see revolving around a Christmas tree. The world tree. So and so anytime anybody learns, they're engaging in this pattern. This is how you learn anything. This is how anybody has ever learned any sport. This is how anybody has ever learned any intellectual exercise. This is how anybody has ever learned or done anything, science, whatever. All the different knowledge systems where people are like attracted to and the ones that clash and all that, their founders, their creators, engaged in this pattern of Christmas. This pattern of intentional self-denial. Like if they were a smart scientist or whatever, they denied what they thought they knew and let go of that for something greater over and over and over again. And that's how they accumulate a deeper and a better understanding of reality. It's like you have to let go of your 5-year-old understanding to have a 10-year-old understanding. You have to let go of your 10-year-old understanding to have whatever. So it's just a constant death process. Everybody is engaging in Christmas. Everybody's engaging in the story and the pattern of life. If they're finding any sort of meaning, any sort of joy, any sort of purpose in existence, it's only through the pattern of Christ. And so even like if through the pattern of Christ, through the pattern of this this method of correct focus, right? It's just correct focus through this pattern of correct focus that is hyper exemplified in the life or in the story, in the memory of Christ. So anybody that's anybody that's coming to an idea or a conclusion that's quote unquote better than quote unquote Christianity, the only way that they're doing that is by means of the underlying meta story, the underlying truths of reality that are revealed in the life of Christ. So that's the King of Kings, Lord of Lords sort of stuff. And people can have disagreements because like they'll have different depths of understanding. And if somebody lets go of if somebody desires to not suffer more than they desire truth, their skill or their understanding, their ideas, their actions can start to suck and be pointless or useless or meaningless. And then they don't want to be told that. You don't want to realize that because that's more suffering, which you're trying to avoid, right? So if you start to try and avoid suffering, you also start to de facto start avoiding correction. And you just get real stupid, and so everyone has like it's that stupidity is why there's Christmas, because it's like it should be happening. It is happening all the time, but when people get stupid, they need some big event, and everyone has to go like, "Hey, wake up! This is the reality." And they go, "Oh," and then you make your New Year's resolutions, and you try not to be an asshole for a couple months, and then you just forget. And by the time it's Christmas again, you've totally forgot the true nature of reality, and you've been living the entire year trying to avoid suffering. And then that just causes this eternal cycle, just as Groundhog's Day, that would end, like you would be released from this cycle of samsara if the obvious pattern of Christmas is just remembered for an entire year. Like all you would have to do is remember it for a whole year, and all of time and all of creation would be ripped asunder and replaced with the kingdom of heaven. But like that's a long time. That's a long time. That's like doing 10. Imagine doing like a 12-hour liturgy. Like you go into a temple, you go into the place, it's like where you're supposed to access the deepest truth as easily as possible, and it's a fucking chore to go in there just for 12 hours, much less an entire year. And so it's like really cool. You can see just how like close the kingdom of heaven is, and how easily it seems like it would be if we just like, oh, remember the most awesome, greatest thing is happening right now, and just somebody hold vigil or hold that for an entire year. So the whole thing, and there are people doing that probably, right? So there's people that are doing that. Definitely not this guy. But there are people out there, I think I've seen them, and then that holds the world together. It's like these threads of lucidity that hold the world together and keep it from being totally destroyed and liberating us from suffering. And so you can see that these people, for anybody who wants to escape suffering, you're the greatest enemy, because that willful suffering, that kenosis, is the thing that creates the world. and the thing that brings everybody closer to God. And so people that want to stop suffering want to destroy the world. That's why they become self-destructive. And as much as you see people being able to be self-destructive, if they're self-destructive and they have a lot of like power, their power is equal to the size of their cultural self, and so they will destroy themselves with like war and insanity. Which causes suffering, and they're trying to just, the suffering causes the world around them to become more and more and more real, more and more meaningful, but they can't feel it because it's that. So you just get in this giant cosmic battle between good and evil, because evil just wants to die. It just wants to stop suffering. Oh, what's suffering? Okay, the human spirit. Maybe we can just eradicate the human spirit so that people don't exist on the inside, and then there's nobody there suffering. So you get the that whole thing, and I don't know. That's Christmas. I don't think it's like I got presents. It's kind of it's all things. It's all people.